Nice to be here. So, what I'm speaking about today is a step-by-step approach to good software design. Okay, and I call it the software design sutra. So let's start. I recently saw this meme on WhatsApp. Who has got this on WhatsApp? No? Yeah. Demonetization idea and demonetization execution, right? And, you know, Kamala Hassan looks so great. So, when I was looking at this image, you know, I was thinking, actually, this is what happened. I don't know why this little blurred.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah, it's still okay. Let's see when we reach the code and see if we can read the code. Okay? So, most of you, I mean, as an architects meetup, do you feel like this? That I create this lovely architecture, I've spent all my time, it's beautiful, and the actual code that the guys write, it's like that, you know? And it's a problem. How many of you face this problem? Raise your hands. Yeah? All of you. How many of you are very happy with the code that you see the coders write? No? I see a lot of shaking heads. No, I don't like it. I don't like it. Why is it a problem? And it's a problem that all of us face, right? And why is that? It is because the guys who are writing the code don't have too much experience. They don't know how to write good code, right? And who has the time to mentor them? Where is the training which teaches you how to do good low-level design? How do you do a good class design? Yeah, the architecture is laid out and so you have to do this small piece of functionality. How do I do it? How do I do a well-designed piece of functionality, right? Nobody is teaching that. Does anybody know any course which they can attend which will teach them that? No, right? So, and this is a problem, people don't know how to design, right? So, first, before we go further, let's try to get concurrence on this, okay? Now I'm not talking about architecture and layered architecture and architectural design patterns. I am talking about, you know, somebody's writing some 20 classes, right? How well has he designed those classes? How well has he designed the methods in the classes? There's design A and design B. Which is better? How do you decide? What is the criteria to say this? I want to hear. How do you decide?
Solid principles.
Solid principles. Very good. Any other idea? How do you decide? I mean, somebody who's working under you comes and says, boss, I have two alternate designs. I can do it this way or I can do it this way. Which do you think is better? What will you look for and say this is a better design?
Decoupling.
Sorry?
Decoupling.
Decoupling. Very good. Solid. Decoupling.
Scalable.
Scalable. Well, scalable is an architect's problem. It's not a coder's problem.
Test driven.
Huh?
Test driven.
Test driven. Okay.
Dry principles.
Dry principles. Very good.
I can understand what.
You can understand. That's a very good criteria. I like that. If I don't understand it, I think that's not okay. That's good. I like that answer. Yeah. Sorry? Based on context. Inclusion based on experience, right? So we're all stuck. We don't have anything. So I have an answer, and that is, I want you guys to comment on it. So in the Software Sutra 0, the Software Sutra 0 says, good design makes future changes easier. Okay? So, and this I've got from Dave, who wrote Pragmatic Programmer. This is his criteria. I don't claim credit to it, but I think it's a lovely criteria. I look at this design, I look at design A, I look at design B. Yeah, I think if you use design B, future changes will be easier. I mean, we all know, right? Nobody gets requirements right first time. There are always going to be changes. If this design makes changes easier, it's a better design. And I think this is a lovely criteria. It's a simple criteria, solid. All these are good, but this simple criteria is terrific. With this, all my problems are solved. Yeah. You build this thing, I say this is better, this is better. And your own designs, right? You start looking at it differently once you learn this sutra. Oh, is this design better? How many of you think this is a good way to decide which is a better design? Could I see a raise of hands? Yeah. Some still hesitant, but yeah, good. So let's. So the software design sutras are small things, right? It's just ideas and concepts which, if you get it into your head, you will just find coding that much easier. But I just want to introduce myself, right? So let me do it very fast, right? I am BTech from Mechanical Engineering from IIT Madras. I was working for Tally. I was the enterprise. Tally has a product called Shopper. If you bought anything from a Nike showroom or a Raymond showroom or any clothing shop, right? The bill which you get is from Shopper. So I was handling that for a few years. I was what they call a product owner, which is a very strange concept which used to be there. You know, product manager, engineering manager, lead architect, test manager, and L3 support manager, right? That's what a product owner is. Luckily, Tally has restructured its organization, but this is what it used to be when I was there. So, I've written a lot of products. 2004, I launched a product called Hamsa, which was a mail management product. 2003, there was an enterprise task management product. There's GoGet, which was a customer management. Back in 95, probably I don't know how many. Okay, there's a product called Papyrus, which was a document manager. It was running on DOS. And Conan the Controller is where I started. I never managed to launch it. So I had a lot of experience with products, and I know what it is, how hard it is. So let's look at code. I mean, I don't want to just talk theory. Let's just actually look at code so that we can make this decision, right? So, simple assignment. I'm not going to read it out to you. I'll just give you guys 2 minutes to read out that assignment, right? Yeah, you guys are able to see it? Very simple, straightforward assignment, right? And now I'm going to show you code which looks like this, right? And I am giving you code, and all of this, I have seen things like this happening, right? So I'm not just talking out of the. So here it is, and they're using a UI framework. And you have an event handler or a callback, and right in the callback, the entire code is written, right? So the major portion of the code is in the actual callback or event handler, right? And a lot of things are being done. Some files are being read here, some globals are being used, and all kinds of things. Globals are being set so that the globals are getting updated here. And most of the things are happening in the event tool, right? And there is the class employee, and in the class constructor, there is a call to the database and updating. So the constructor has calls to it. And these are all things I'm saying, and I've actually seen guys write code like this. I mean, it's not. So then there is one loop, and there is some complicated calculations, if this, then if this, if else, something I don't know, and the same thing, a lot of calculations is being done, the database is getting updated, typical code, right? How many of you say, I have never seen anybody write code like this? Does anybody, he says he may not have written, has he not seen this? See, much worse than this. Okay, right. So now let's look at a nice, elegant design.
But this code
So
is job guaranteed.
yeah,
If we have this kind of code, our job is guaranteed.
yeah. That's why probably guys are doing it. I mean, nobody else can do anything with this code. I'm the only guy who can do anything with this code, right? So make sure your job, make sure your job is safe. And let me say, it's not that this code doesn't work. This code works. If it's handed over to testing, all the tests will pass, right? So, and that's fine. That's what happens. So let's look at this code, right? So in the callback, there's one line which calls attendance info in updater. Attendance updater just has 3 lines. It gets the list of employees, gets a list of working days, calls an updater, and here you have an employee data retriever and get all current employees. Right now, it's doing it from a text file. If tomorrow there's a change, hey, instead of text file, it's database, it's very simple to change, right? We all agree that the criteria is it easy to change in the future, right? So if I write code like this, get working date retriever, it goes through some codes, whatever it is, returns working date. Now let's look at that updater, right? It takes for all the dates, it gets the scan info, right? This is the scanner, right? The scanner puts timestamps against employee. So there's some format, it gets the scan info. Then for each employee, it updates the employee attendance. What does employee attendance do? It takes a attendance calc factory, which depends on the type of employee, and the calculator does this, it writes attendance and updates attendance, right? How many of so there is a code which has green background, that thing had a good background. How many of you guys agree that this is better code? Can I have a show of hands? Right? So this is good, right? And somebody who has a lot of experience writing code and reads a lot, they'll create code like this, right? But the problem is this. How do I get this guy to start writing code like that, right? It's not that everybody writes code like that. There are people who write nice, clean code, right? But there are a lot of people who don't do it. The problem is, how do I get them to move from here to there, right? So the answer is Software Design Sutra 1. Create abstractions by writing sentences and write code that reflects the sentences, right? What do I mean by this? Yeah. Not exactly pseudocode. I just say express it, right? Write down what you're going to do as sentence, not as code. You don't start thinking of it. See, the problem is we start jumping into thinking of ifs and thens and for loops and whiles. No. Pseudocode won't lead you down that path. What you need to do is write in plain, simple English. Let's take this. What am I going to do with this whole system, right? What this whole system is doing is update attendance information for employees for working days. That's what the system is doing. Okay, how are you going to do this? Get the employee information, get the working dates and update attendance information. What am I doing as chunks of work, right? It is not
It's like user story.
well, yeah, like a user story, but it is the solution, right? How am I going to solve this user story, right? How am I going to deliver this user story? Write it very chunkily. I think user story is a good, thing for understanding this. I'm writing it very chunked out. Update attendance information. I have said, how are you going to update it? Oh, I'm going to get scan information for a date and update the employee attendance. How am I going to do that? I'm going to get scan information and update employee attendance, calculate attendance based on employee type. So this is what I'm trying to do, right? So this takes a little practice. Okay, this takes a little coaching. It's not the intuitive way to do it, because we've learned to think in loops and ifs and things like that. Don't just tell it to me simply. Just tell what you're going to do. Is this plain and simple? Right? It just describes what you're going to do. That's all this thing does. Once you do that, write code that reflects the sentences. So let's look at that. If you see update attendance information, attendance info updater, get employee information, employee data retriever, get all current employees, get working dates is equal to get working dates, update attendance information, attendance updater, update attention details for employee and working dates. Your code has to exactly match the structure of your code, has to match the sentences. You should not think in ifs and loops. Write it in plain English, what you're going to do, and write code. And I wrote this code over the last 2 days just for this session. You know how I start? I first write down the sentence, then I write, okay, attendance info updater dot update. Then I go there, define update, I just write this, right? Then I run it. Whichever class is missing, whichever method is missing, I keep writing them. It's completely flows. If you haven't tried this, you don't realize how fast you can code, right? Because I know what I have to do. There will be some say for example, right? How do I find out if I have timestamps? Okay, I'm leaving it for later. Let me first get the overall shape and structure of my code right. Okay. If I don't know how to calculate the times, because what happens is, that you look at them, I think I'll face a problem there. Let me do that. Let me figure out how many hours he spent in the office. So we solve that first and build our code around that, and it is a mess. So let's look at the next one, right? Get scan information for and update employees. So for date, oops. Sorry, I'm pressing the wrong button. Right? So get scan info. Scan info is equal to get scan info. Update employee attendance. For he and employee, update employee attendance in this data. Calculate attendance based on employee type. So now, if you notice, typically when something like this happens, people will start writing a switch case or an if else, right? If else if trees. People will tend to write something like that. But if you say that my structure has to follow this sentence, I can't add if unless the code calls for it. You start thinking, how can I do it without if loop? And then you find out, actually, that factory pattern, that is what does this, right? So what happens if you write these sentences and force your code to follow that structure of those sentences, you will suddenly, and I've seen this happen very often, once you start following this rigorously, you say no. If there is no if else in the sentence, if there is nothing about that, I have to find there, and I'm telling you, there is always some pattern which will meet your needs. The trouble is, you learn the patterns and say, where can I apply it? No. You feel the need when you say, listen, I don't want an if-else structure here. How can I do this? How can I say, calculate attendance based on employee type? Then you say, attendance, actually I could have written it as one line, but just for ease of reading, I've made an intermediate variable. So I do an attendance calc factory and calculate the attendance, and this attendance calc factory returns it based on employee, right? So the calc factory takes the employee. So the attendance calculator comes back based on this thing. So, and this is how you actually, if you start doing this, you start finding design patterns falling into your code, right? But you have to be rigorous. You cannot say, I will, oh yeah, I don't know how to do this, let me do it else. And if you are, say, supposing you're not doing it in an object-oriented language, you're doing it in C++, or then you say, oh, I don't know how to do this. Then you say, oh, what you need? Then you need to figure out that in C++ you need to use function pointers, right? Or you're using JavaScript, you're not using an object-oriented, you're using a functional language. Then you use higher order functions which return functions, right? Every language has a solution for it. The design patterns focus for object-oriented languages, but the problem, this is agnostic, this is language agnostic, right? So, this is one of my favorite quotes, right? The sooner you start to code, the longer the program will take, right? This is one of my favorite quotes about programming, right? So what you need to do, take your time, write down your sentences, what am I trying to do, and force the structure of your code to follow that, right? So that's software sutra number 1. So now I will be picking up the pace. There are a lot of sutras. I've just covered 2 sutras in a little bit of detail. This I'll flick through, right? So there's a concept of code stereotype. So what it means is role stereotype. This code is doing this, and it should be only doing this, right? So actually, if you are doing good clean design, you will find that software methods or functions, whatever you want to call them, units of code follow some kind of stereotype, right? So translators basically does control flow based on the requirements. That's why they translate. They translate the requirements into your code, right? So calculate attendance is a typical translator. It is doing this if duration is greater than 7 hours, attendance is 1. If duration is greater than 4 hours, attendance is 0.5. Otherwise, the default attendance is 0, right? If I see this code and I don't know the requirements, I cannot understand this code. I can kind of backward. Probably this is what it's doing, right? So there are pieces of code where the requirements is being fulfilled, right? And when you are doing that, don't do anything else there. Focus on the requirement that's being fulfilled. And if there are control flow solution which is coming from the solution, okay, should I use a factory here, or these are decisions where you are structuring your solution, right? It's nothing to do with the requirements. It's a question of how do I structure my code so that I'm reaching a good design. So you put those things into what I call coordinators. Say for example, your factory is a typical coordinator. There's a control flow. This control flow is focusing on how to deliver this solution in a well-structured manner, right? So any processing, transformation, calculations are put into service providers, right? So don't put a service provider. See, I told you one of the code smells, right? That fellow in the bad code, that guy has done the attendance calculation and he's writing to database right there and then in that same function, in that same method, right? What is he doing? It should be broken into a service provider, right? It's where the database is getting updated, and the calculations, which is a translator, where he's translating the business needs into code. You should not mix this. A translator should only be doing, it should be calling service providers if required. It should be calling coordinators if required. So if you start seeing, looking at code and saying, what type of code is this? There are not too many. There are 3. Is it a translator? Is it a coordinator? Is it a service provider? Let me not have one method which does both these things. That's all. Right? So these 3 sutras you follow to try to say Like, don't mix up these things. You will automatically find the quality of code improves. This is a typical service provider. Basically, it's given an array of timestamps and it has to calculate what is the total duration that guy was in office. He was going in and out, in and out. So you've got an array of timestamps. How long was he actually inside, sitting in the office? This is how you do something like that, right? So this is a service provider, right? It's called somewhere, right? And it does only that. It only provides this service. I will not mix requirement logic and this service into the same function. I will never put it in the same method, right? That is the key. Understand service providers, translators and coordinators. Make sure no method mixes the two things, right? How many of you understand referentially transparent and referentially opaque? Can I have a show of hands? Okay, right. So, referentially transparent and referentially opaque comes from functional languages, right? So, let's take a simple function, right? Which returns x squared. So, I have a function called x. So, I have input of x. I return x into x, right? Suppose, right, I'm God and I know, boss, this function will never be called except with the value 1, 4 and 9 throughout its lifetime. Okay. So instead of x into x, I can say if the input parameter is 1, return 1, if it is 4, return 16, if it is 9, return 81. That's all, right? So I can replace this with just a number, just returning numbers. So let's take something that's called referentially transparent. So let's look at something which is referentially opaque. So let me again take a simple function. What this function does is raise to power based on a global variable, right? So there is a global variable watt power, okay? So when I call this function with x, I say x to the power of the global variable watt power. Now I cannot replace this function because somewhere else that global variable is getting changed. So the value which is getting returned is not a simple number. It is not transparent, right? So it is a very important concept, right? And you should prefer writing functions, methods which are referentially transparent. Say for example, this is referentially transparent. It just takes an array of timestamps like 0, 9, 30, 21, 45, right? And it will return the duration. This is referentially transparent. I don't care, right? This is referentially transparent. And try to make your code referentially transparent as far as possible. Leads to far less bugs, right? Sutra 6. Separate referentially transparent and referentially opaque translators, coordinators, service provider. If I have a service provider, right, and it is doing two things, right? It's actually a service, it's also, some portion of it is referentially transparent. Writing to a database is referentially opaque, right? Getting user inputs is referentially opaque. I separate out. I don't put code which is referentially opaque together with code which is referentially transparent. As far as possible, I try to separate it out. I will have the referentially opaque service provider. I will break it up into referentially transparent pieces, write them and have that thing called this, right? So by doing this, you separating out, you're actually eliminating a lot of globals. So if you start understanding and appreciating this, how many of you have written a reasonably complex application with zero use of globals? Can anybody raise their hands if they have done that? Right? Not yet. That's a good answer, right? And the hard part. And so how do you eliminate globals, right? don't really know. But once you start understanding referential transparency, referential opaqueness, and how you translators, coordinators, what they're doing, you'll find it far easier to achieve that. So let's move to the next one. Interfacer retrieve information from external systems. Use data holders to pass information between parts of the system. Simple thing. Don't have the data holder having code. It's just a data holder, right? That's what you use to pass it around. Use date holders, and the state holder should, strictly speaking, if they only I need to go into a little more detail here, so I don't have enough time for that. But if you figure out what are translators and how state holders interact with that, you will see the path to eliminating globals. Right? Prefer to use iterators to
I
walk
have one
over.
question related to globals.
Right.
You have a business logic. You need to have some data structures, right? Let's say you have set of records. Somebody has to hold those records, right? So that becomes ultimately a global variable.
Yeah, but why do you have to hold it? See,
That's a lot of business logic. Let's say in a distributed system application, it needs to receive events from other sources and keeps a bookkeeping, right? You do normal bookkeeping.
okay.
It could be a worst case, it could be a singleton class, a vector inside that, etc. So that becomes a
But-
global variable, right?
Yeah, see,
You can't eliminate that, right?
I wouldn't like to say I can 100% eliminate globals. I agree with you, right? But I have, if you follow some of the sutras that I've taught here, you will find that your need for global goes down dramatically. Let's take a example, okay? So then it will make sense, right? So I have an item, right? And the tax has to be calculated, and based on an item property, it should either be tax inclusive tax calculation or tax exclusive tax calculation. This is the kind of typical thing that comes up, right? So somewhere and the tax calculation is complex. So what do you tend to do? There are a lot of things which are happening. So in the code for the tax calculation, if you will have, if the global variable is this, if the global variable is tax exclusive, do this. If it's tax inclusive, do this. So you have a structure which looks like that, right? And that's where you keep referring to the global, because a lot of functions which are doing this calculation is referring to this. What you do is you write down the sentences and structure it in such a way and have a different portions of the tax calculator return from a factory based on whether the item is tax exclusive or not. And you will you find that this, if that is only happening in one function, which is the translator, we just calling calculators and calling them, the need for the global goes away, right? So there are tips and tricks which, if you start understanding some of the design patterns and how writing sentences allows you to structure your code well, you can eliminate a lot of globals.
Okay, maybe I take some time. So let's say you write a software for a library. You're going to use an in-memory database. Maybe the application startup will read the list of books from a persistent storage to in-memory database. So I'm referring to the in-memory database as global.
Well, so
I understood the other one. Other one is a batsman.
right.
How about this?
See, when we are talking about data persistence, right? So let's understand that data which is being persisted, right? I will have just, if I have a memory structure which has data persistence, I don't see any difference between that and accessing a database. How would you isolate that?
Yeah, I don't think that's a global.
Yeah.
Global also will depend on how you access it.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah.
You can
Keeping
access
it in-
data.
Yes.
So if I pass that memory structure to my function, to my object, that doesn't become a global because it is within the context of it, within the scope of that object.
Right.
If I go ahead and reference it outside the scope, that becomes a global.
Yeah.
So in essence, that's right? That's what we
Just the data.
That part is clear.
Yeah.
That
That's
maybe
just
just
data.
data store or something.
When the
but-
function who operates on the data doesn't know that the data comes
Yes,
from
yes,
the
yes,
exactly.
detachment is done.
It has to be isolated.
But that's still it's a global.
Yeah. What you're
memory
discussing is-
persistence and memory, I wouldn't call it global.
Yeah, you're discussing state holding.
State model. Yeah.
Not, you're not discussing, I mean, you're discussing the fact that there is state being held, right, and that is continuously being modified, which is not the same as what he's saying as global. Global is a scope problem, right? I have access to a lot of
understand
scope.
that. So the stakeholder is not a global in this
Yes.
sense.
Yes, a stakeholder is not a global, it's a local variable which is holding state, and the translator uses that intelligently with facades and factories to make sure that it does not require global scope, right? So by using a stakeholder and translators intelligently, which you can reduce the reference to out of scope variables. Let me put it like that. Right? All units do only one thing. That's what we call the OOT principle, which I was saying, right? If it's a service provider come translator, it's a mess. This does one thing. And you must be very rigorous. These things, you need to be very rigorous. You can't say, okay, at this time I'm letting it go. No, you have to figure out how to do it, right? If you don't do that, the structure of your code will never improve. Every entity must be true to its name. So, the importance of naming, I don't think I'll spend any time on that. So, that covers all the sutras. I rushed them a bit. So here's my recommended reading. I read a lot, and these sutras which I've come up with depend on this. Object design covers some of these stakeholders and things like that, but she uses it differently, and I've modified it based on my experience. Design Patterns Explained is a wonderful book. Pragmatic Programmer, I'm a big fan. Right? So, did you find this interesting? How many of you found this interesting? Yeah? Some hands going up? Good. So, can I request for some assistance in return for this interesting talk? I need some help with the survey. Okay? What is this survey? This software, I do corporate training for companies, software companies, and I have a 3-day workshop, things like that. I am now considering, right, should I hold workshops where developers pay and come to the workshop, right? So this is a question I have in my mind, right? I want to offer a 1-day workshop on the software design sutra and go over all of them in a lot of detail. So I want to know how many of you would think something like that would be interesting. How many of you would recommend it to your friends? The survey will be focused around those questions. Also, how much do you think developers will be able to pay? So it's a market survey that I'm considering whether I should launch software design sutras training, right? So this is the help I require from all of you guys, right? And what I want you guys to do is take out your phone or your whatever it is, and if you are willing to help me and take part in the survey, just take out your phone, send a mail to gk@samiksha.biz with the subject survey. I don't want to send the survey link to anybody and everybody. People who think they want to help me for this interesting lecture, thank you very much. Just send me a mail at gk@samiksha. Just do it right away. Don't wait. Take out your phone, take your start your email client, and send one simple email. Right? That'll help me. And only people who send me this, I'll send the survey to. I don't want to spam all you guys. And for everybody who helps me with the survey, if the market survey gives positive results and I do launch it, I'll send you a 25% discount voucher which you can use, so pass it on to friends, colleagues, whatever, right? So that's for, I'll help you back. You help me, I help you, you help me, I help you back, right? So Thanks to Pro Awareness and Anand for this opportunity. I really appreciate it. So I see 5 minutes on my timer, so I can take questions. No questions? Yeah.
Can you give me one more example for coordinators and the translators?
Well, translators, so what happens in the translator, right? Say for example, I am having, we were talking just now of, supposing I want to do tax calculation, right? So what I have is, I have a controlled flow which says, based on the type of item, I have to do this,